Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. What's even more stable than real estate prices? What's your return on time invested after all? Real estate has barriers to entry. Then the difference between Turnkey and the BRRRR models of real estate investing, all today on Get Rich Education. Finally, with Total Control Financial, get checkbook control of your existing 401k and IRA funds to invest in real estate. Yes, you can move your retirement money into your own checking account, but you must avoid the little-known tax that you'll get hammered with in a self-directed IRA. Instead, start your QRP. Learn more and get your free copy of the QRP book by text messaging QRP in all capital letters to 72,000. The company that's provided our listeners with more loans than anyone is Ridge Lending Group, NMLS 42056. You can finance more than 10 single families up to fourplexes. Serving most U.S. states, their knowledge and experience leads to your financial freedom. They're number one in the investment space. Pre-qualify and then chat with President Chaley Ridge personally. Start on your next investment property loan right now at ridgelendinggroup.com.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to GRE, from Cherry Hill, New Jersey to the Cherry City of Salem, Oregon, and across 188 nations worldwide. I'm Keith Weinhold. This is Get Rich Education, and stock market investing is volatile. Some people have the stomach for this frenetic yo-yoing, and some don't. In fact, stocks are so volatile that even when they're aggregated into mutual funds or ETFs, they're still pretty volatile. Gold prices are more stable than stocks. Real estate prices are even more stable yet. They might be up 3% this year, then 4% next year, then 5% the following year. That's really stable. But there's something even more stable than real estate prices, and it probably has an even greater effect on you than real estate prices do, and that is real estate rents. Real estate rent amounts are more stable than real estate prices. Though it's not common, you might see real estate prices jump up 10% or more in 1 year, or down 10% or more in 1 year in a given area. Well, that virtually never happens with rent amounts. When real estate prices go up, understand that it's pretty likely that they're going to keep going up without any substantial blip or interruption, and the same is true when prices go down. Real estate prices, now they're affected by things like housing supply versus demand, new regulations in an area, mortgage interest rates, job growth, and the remaining availability of developable land in a local geography. Real estate prices can soar, but even at the same time in that same market, rents will move up more slowly. Rents, they tend to move with income, and that's why they behave differently than home prices. Rents often rise a little, but they rarely fall. Even in a hot market, rents won't rise 10% a year. But oppositely, in a downtrending market, even in the awful housing recession and mortgage meltdown that we saw 12 years ago, rents would rarely fall 10% a year. Rent amounts are therefore what I would call inelastic. Real estate prices are more elastic. Real estate prices are more like a rubber band. They can stretch out farther than rents can over a period of years, and that's really what we've been seeing the past few years, where prices stretch out farther than rents. When rents don't keep up proportionally to that stretch, this puts downward pressure on rent-to-price ratios. Areas that used to give you a 1% rent-to-price ratio now might only give 0.9%. Well, when does this ever get rebalanced then and sort of come back into whack? it becomes rebalanced in times of either slower growth or recession, because that's when fewer people can buy and when fewer people want to buy. When prices plateau and there are fewer buyers, this increases rent demand and rental amounts, and now the rent to price ratio rebalances once again, and it could go from, say, 0.9% back up to a full 1%. When home prices go up again, people want to buy again. Then there are fewer renters, so rents don't go up very much. Real estate prices and rental income, therefore, are non-correlating. You want to be invested in a real asset that's non-correlating. Capital appreciation and rent income are just two of the 5 ways that you are typically paid as a real estate investor, but they're the most important two, and they're not correlated to each other. Because rent amounts are an income-driven phenomena, let's talk about jobs then. Larger metro markets have a greater share of jobs and a greater diversification of jobs. There are efficiencies for businesses to concentrate in one area. Also, when you invest in a larger city, you tend to have access to better data. And compared to other world nations, the US has really great real estate data so that you can make better decisions. Now, often it's about the type of job too, of course. Lay people and sometimes even financial columnists, they will often falsely think, oh, it's gotta be great to be a landlord in Manhattan or Boston or San Francisco, because look at the incomes and the high rent amounts that you can get there. Well, you know what? Exactly the opposite is true. Exactly the opposite. Because there's such a great concentration of wealth in New York and San Francisco and Silicon Valley, rent amounts don't keep up proportionally to that higher price rubber band that's been stretched out so far. That price elasticity has stretched out too far in those places. You know what the phenomena is that stretches price elasticity out very far beyond rent amounts? It's what's happening in the city that I just visited 1 week ago, Vancouver, Canada. So much Chinese and other foreign investment money has flowed into that city, much like what's happened in Manhattan and Miami. Those foreign investment dollars in Vancouver drive up prices, but yet do nothing to stimulate incomes in a city. Nothing. Therefore, rent amounts don't increase one dime, but yet prices spike. Well, that's exactly what a cash flowing real estate investor wants to stay away from. Those are also the type of places most vulnerable to a housing price crash. Now, within area incomes, it's also about the type of job that a particular geography attracts. Seattle, with Microsoft and Amazon, has high-tech, higher-paying jobs. Well, those people then tend to be homeowners more so than renters. Look at Las Vegas. It's different there. Vegas has lots of leisure and hospitality jobs. That generally provides lower pay, and those people are more likely to be renters than they are to be homeowners. Now, let's look at where the numbers really start to work for you, though. Places like Memphis or Jacksonville, lots of transportation jobs there, lower pay, and therefore lots of renters, and low house prices so that your numbers work as an investor. And then there are cities that attract a disproportionately high number of medical jobs. Medical's great because it's projected to grow for a long time. Medical has some, what I'll call, dimensionality to it. Medical centers attract both higher paying jobs, like that of a surgeon that's looking to be a homeowner, and then lower paying jobs, like that of a nurse's assistant that's more likely to be a renter. So really, to summarize your takeaway, what's more stable than real estate prices? It's real estate rents. And what is the primary driver of real estate rents? It's an area's income. We're going to discuss turnkey real estate investing versus the BRRRR strategy here shortly. But first, it is definitely still not easy to qualify for a mortgage today because just like you, I'm an active investor myself, and I've been qualifying for more mortgage loans for income properties these past few weeks. And a lot of times you're wise to use an investor-friendly mortgage provider. maybe you're qualifying with a Highlands mortgage or a Ridge lending group, then yeah, there is still some pain involved when you're getting pre-approved. You've got to show the lender a lot of documentation, your last few months' bank statements, your last 2 years' tax returns, and they'll often need to see your existing property's mortgage balances and maybe even the lease agreements and some other things. In qualifying for a loan, you might have to end up doing something a little frustrating, like logging into a website that you haven't logged into for a while, and then you don't remember your password and you have to do a password reset. I would say that some of these inconveniences are both good and bad. It's bad for you because, frankly, it takes your time and it's inconvenient. The upside is that this stabilizes real estate prices because this is making loans to people that aren't going to walk away from their property. And that's because borrowers have to have both a solid financial backing and they don't want to do anything in the future that would jeopardize what's now a good credit score. This mortgage pre-approval process, you know what it really is? It is a barrier to entry. It's a barrier to entry so that not everybody can get in. You have to have a down payment too. Well, you want to be involved in something where there's some barrier to entry to be involved in it. Because if the masses are doing something, then it really isn't profitable. It's like back to the old Mark Twain quote, as soon as you find yourself on the side of the majority, it is time to pause and reflect. So as you're buying your next investment property or even primary residence, some takeaways that I'd share with you are be organized. Buy multiple properties at once if you can. I know that not everyone is in a position to do this, but I try to buy more than one property at a time from one provider and keep those properties on the same timeline. This gives you efficiencies from making the offers to scheduling your property inspections to appraisals, all the way down to targeting just having one closing with your mobile notary for multiple properties. Using the same mortgage company for these simultaneous buys increases the chances that you'll have just one loan servicer to deal with down the road. I'm talking about a loan servicer like AmeriHome. This is the servicer that works with the company that eventually buys your loan, and then you'll just have one website where you can log in and see multiple properties that you have. When you're qualifying for a property, yes, there will be plenty of emails in your inbox, but it's a great way for you to learn. You might get an email from your title agent saying, hey, here's the receipt of your earnest money deposit and the title commitment for your records. And if you're not sure what that means, you can reply and ask. There's no shame in that. Most people in the process are willing to help you learn. Now, I own a lot of properties, and in qualification, I soon realized that I'd never actually seen a few tenant lease agreements on some of my properties, and I got to take my first look at those. So the most important part is acting and getting more property in your portfolio. And you know, nothing is harder than buying your first one. Now, maybe in loan qualification, that's the time that you begin to ask yourself the question that I often bring up. It's not about your ROI as much as it is about your ROTI, your return on time invested. Well, what's your return on time invested here then? Well, look, ROTI is your return divided by your time. With what most investments provide, their real return is zero after inflation, emotion, taxes, fees, and volatility. Therefore, their ROTI is zero divided by a little time, which is zero. With strategically bought real estate, your return should be a substantially positive number divided by some unit of time. Well, now that's ROTI positive. And you do need to remind yourself of that because during loan qualification, you will have some pesky extra emails in your inbox. Well, what if your income property today provides you with a 6% or 7% cash-on-cash return and you want to be more aggressive and double that number or maybe even triple that number, We're going to talk about how to do that with a real-life example and a great guest next. I'm Keith Weinhold. This is Get Rich Education.
Would you like to know the easiest way to create wealth and passive income with real estate? This is Marco Santarelli with Norada Real Estate Investments. Now you can access the best deals without the stress or hassle of having to find, renovate, or manage those properties. We save you time by providing you with passive income investment properties in some of the best U.S. markets. Learn more by downloading your free copy of The Ultimate Guide to Passive Real Estate Investing. There's no obligation and nothing to buy. Simply visit passiverealestateguide.com and get your free copy today. That's passiverealestateguide.com.
Countless property investors get killed with maintenance costs, but that's far less likely when you buy brand new construction. Let me tell you about JWB Real Estate Capital in Jacksonville, Florida. They pioneered the build-to-rent model where you can invest in new construction, turnkey rental properties. That's why JWB was featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. To learn more and see inventory, go to newconstructionturnkey.com.
This is Rich Dad Advisor Ken McElroy. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold and don't quit your daydream.
I'd like to welcome Phil onto the show. He's a real estate expert, including in the BRRRR model of real estate investing. Phil, welcome to Get Rich Education.
Keith, thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Phil, let's talk about that BRRRR model of real estate investing. Yes, BRRRR, and that is not a reference to the fact that it's getting cold outside this time of year. It's a model, it's a model that's, I would say, closer to buy and hold investing than it is flipping. But tell us about the BRRRR model of real estate investing. How do you define it?
Well, for those that aren't really familiar, Keith, it does stand for buy, renovate, rent, refinance, and repeat. And it's a terrific way of recycling one's capital as well as the velocity of money. It's essentially the concept of acquiring, generally for cash, distressed asset, and ideally in a growth area, growth market, path of progress that requires often a gut renovation right down to the studs. And then that gut renovation delivers you a property that is brand new for all intents and purposes. And then the idea is later, you're going to, after the property has been rented and is cash flowing, you're going to be refinancing that property and turning around. And the repeat means taking the cash that you've received from that refinance effort and reinvesting it into a new property.
So the investor is not the one doing the hands-on rehab, but the investor is the one funding it. And really the overarching goal here with the BRRRR strategy is to pull out nearly all of the money that you put into a property for that rehab so that then once you refinance it at that higher value, you effectively bought a property for almost nothing, yet after you refinance, you'd still have about 25% equity in the property. And we'll get into an example with real numbers on a real property a little bit later, Phil, but talk to us a bit more on how the BRRRR strategy differs from the classic turnkey model.
With a classic turnkey model, you're acquiring a property under perhaps more traditional terms. You identify the property, you reserve it, and then you go through your due diligence while the operator or the seller of that property is perhaps completing the renovation of that property. You would have it inspected by a third-party inspector, corrected by the seller. If you're using leverage, your mortgage would close simultaneously with the property closing. Altogether, the cycle takes about 30 to 45 days, plus or minus. The thing about the classic turnkey model, while it cash flows nicely and you can still generally achieve 10 to 12% cash-on-cash returns annually, what you don't have is the opportunity typically to pull out built-in equity.
Right.
With the BRRRR model, because you're often paying all cash, all in, meaning for the distressed asset and then for the rehab that's going to be done, you're given a discounted price reflective of that. And in doing so, that's generally as much as sometimes 10% of the built-in equity, because if the seller, the person you're buying the distressed asset from and that's doing the renovation, doesn't have to use their own cash, they're passing that savings, the cost of money, along to you. Then 6 or more months later, and that's really a seasoning period where lenders are concerned, you have a fully renovated, cash flowing property that, both because of time and condition, has improved and increased its ARV, the after repair value, such that you often can enjoy 20% or greater increases in value with a BRRRR.
So as the investor, I want you to understand that you will need to come out of pocket with more cash, typically, than you would with your 20% down payment plus closing costs for a turnkey property. But let's keep in mind, oftentimes it will be your own cash that you use, but keep other people's money in mind. Sometimes you can potentially get a hard money loan in order to fund this. Phil, why don't you talk to us about the type of property that makes a good BRRRR candidate? Like, what are those things that make one property better than another for the BRRRR model?
It really comes down to picking the right market and then, of course, the right property. And it's very important to work with an operator that has both a track record and that uses, to put it simply and bluntly, licensed general contractors. And the problem with a lot of BRRRR operators, or people that suggest they're BRRRR operators, Keith, is they use unlicensed crews, and the quality of the work is inconsistent and or insufficient. If you're buying in a good growth market, and I can, get into that in a little bit, certainly what makes a good growth market, and the property happens to be well located in the path of progress and close to other areas in a market that have increased values of property and can be acquired by the operator at the right price, then that really qualifies it as a good BRRRR candidate, because you need really to be able, with the after repair value comps, closed sales comps that are legitimate comps, to be able to suggest generally at least a 20% or greater bump in value from your acquisition, all-in acquisition costs, to the after repair value when you do your cash out refi. The whole point of a BRRRR, really, it's as much a financial strategy as anything else, because by waiting that 6 or more months after you initially close on the property, you can generally, if you qualify for a conventional loan, get up to 75% in terms of 75% of the appraised value, without regard to what you actually paid all in the beginning. As you suggested, Keith, earlier, if your price of purchase happened to be X and your appraisal taking 75% of it equals about X, you can almost enjoy infinite returns because you're getting all your money back out.
A lot of the reasons that make a turnkey a good investment geographically and market-wise could be a lot of the same reasons that a BRRRR makes sense. But yeah, like you're bringing up, Phil, you do not want to find yourself in a situation where you're having to manage the contractors day to day. So it's about working with that contractor that's doing the rehab and working with that team that you know has a good track record. So you have an example, and this is actually a BRRRR deal that's available right now. So this is a real life example. And again, just to drop back, BRRRR stands for buy, renovate, rent, refinance, and then repeat. This example, it's really going to bring some numbers and some real life to this. So there are a lot of numbers flying around here. So this is something you're really going to want to pay close attention to. So give us a real life example with numbers, Phil, on how the BRRRR model works.
The particular subject property that I'm focused on right now, it is available today. The asset price, meaning the distressed asset price, stands at $40,000.
Okay, and you're buying a pretty distressed property at that point.
Yeah, you wouldn't even be able to, it's not, tenant worthy.
It's shabby.
Not rentable. Yeah, it's downright ugly, in fact. But it's in a very good area that, once renovated completely, carries with it some interesting and impressive comps. In our estimation, that property would require a gut renovation costing somewhere in the neighborhood of, I'm going to say somewhere in the neighborhood, but this would be a locked-in reality were somebody to buy this property, $55,000 for a total price of $95,000.
Okay, so $40,000 for the asset plus $55,000 for the renovation, a total cost of $95K so far.
Right. Now, that's not all paid, Keith, at once up front. Typically, for a BRRRR, you pay for the distressed assets of the $40,000. You pay for closing costs, which might be around $3,500, and then you pay generally half of the renovation cost. The other half of the renovation cost is paid in two different draws that goes with the construction progress. Seller finishes the roughs, meaning, say, example, the roof, the HVAC system, electrical, plumbing, drywall. Then there's going to be a capital call to pay that next draw, which is 25% of the total construction amount. And then when the finishes are done, you're going to pay the other 25%. You're not out of pocket all-in price up front. Then, at that point, I kind of call BRRRRs a BRRRR key, if you will, because buyer, the owner, is going to have an independent third-party inspection, just like a typical turnkey property. And you're always with turnkeys, whether they be the classic model or the BRRRR, going to have, believe it or not, an ugly inspection report. But that's okay. Every time, guaranteed. If you don't, I'd question the efficiency of the inspector. A punch list will be developed. The seller, the operator here, will correct against that punch list, and you can verify that all the corrections have been satisfactorily performed. Then a qualified tenant is installed, and there is already designated property management in place, and you're able to then cash flow, and you're guaranteed in this particular model, even in a gut renovation, to be cash flowing after maximum 4 months, even if the construction has not yet been completed. Then the idea is going to the third R, if you will. You're going to reach out at about 6 months after that seasoning period and have your lender appraise the property. And then upon that appraisal, you're able to receive 75% of the appraised value. And then the idea is that you're going to recycle your cash, turn around, and reinvest that cash into your next BRRRR property.
All right. And on this particular example that we're using, there is that total cost of $95,000 that we mentioned earlier, $40K for the asset, $55K for the renovation, for the total all-in of $95K. But after the appraisal takes place, post-renovation and post-tenanting, that's when you get an appraisal oftentimes for something worth more than what you put into it, about $115,000 in the case of this particular property.
Exactly, Keith, which means that you would basically get cash out against that appraisal. It's just over $86,000.
75% of that $115K, about $86K back out.
Correct. With an all-in cost, Keith, of $95,000, and were you to receive that $86,000 cash out against your appraisal of $115,000, right, that means you only have $9,000 net out of pocket, plus your closing costs and your finance fees, for a total of about $15,000 net. Now, the interesting thing, Keith, about this property and why this gives you such impressive returns, and I think is attractive to a lot of investors, is that your cash-on-cash return is greatly amplified when you minimize so distinctly your net cash in this deal. You now have a property worth $115,000 that if you were to buy typical conventional turnkey property valued at $115,000, you'd have about $29,000 net out of pocket in that deal between down payment, closing costs, and finance fees. Whereas, as I've just suggested, you only have about $15,000 in this deal. And that's what takes your cash on cash returns from a typical turnkey of, who knows, 10 or 12% annually perhaps, and sends it upwards of 18% or more. And you're quickly into your next property without having to essentially pull together your cash for the next down payment, closing costs, and finance fees as you do with a classic turnkey.
That's right. And on this particular example, the rent happens to be $10.50 per month. But what we're really getting at here is that you'd have a cash-on-cash return of 9.4% before the refinance. But once refinanced, your cash-on-cash return is somewhere toward 18%. And what is the reason for that? The short story is because you now have so little cash out of pocket into this property.
Correct.
So this is really a great way for people to minimize their exposure and then go ahead and recycle their cash and keep using it over and over again, increasing their velocity of money that way. So tell us, what do you think? Can you do a BRRRR on virtually any property as long as you're in the right market?
Unfortunately, the answer is no. You can sort of do a modified hybrid of a BRRRR if you consider a BRRRR to be nothing more than a vast reconditioning of the property and buying it for all cash. The elements that make a BRRRR exciting to an investor, Keith, happen to be both that discounted all-in price up front, contrasted with a healthy growth of after-repair value that you achieve, again, by waiting that 6-month or longer seasoning period in a good, strong growth market. Sadly, in a lot of markets, and I've had experience in a lot of markets around the country, Keith, with the classic turnkey model, the bottom line is not every property requires a brand new roof. Not every property requires a brand new HVAC system. With a BRRRR, one of the things that's really exciting about it is the ability to overcome maybe improper prior renovations. Because of that gut renovation, you're getting all new systems and roof and so on. It really does put you in the best possible position long term to overcome any heavy duty CapEx expenses or issues. And also, too, you can achieve higher rents as the property is all new.
That's a great point about what might make a good BRRRR property. Perhaps a property is not shabby enough if it still has amenities and things on it that are too new. It's about really being in a good location. And with location, I know you do a lot of BRRRRs in Baltimore. In fact, the example we just used was on North Washington Street in Baltimore. So tell us about what makes Baltimore a good BRRRR market.
Well, Baltimore is an exciting market, Keith, and for a number of reasons. It's a very dynamic market. It has yet, and one thing that we look at, obviously, is the pre-recession highs for home prices in a market. And this is going back to like 2008 and thereabouts. Anytime you find a market, Baltimore being one example, where the current home prices still have yet to reach that pre-recession high mark, that suggests you're in what could well be a good growth market. Why? Because history tells us that all of those home prices are going to hit and exceed that pre-recession high. Baltimore is very similar to another market not far away, Philadelphia, 5 or 10 years ago. And yet, Philadelphia hit and exceeds that pre-recession high, but also has other economic factors, as Baltimore happens to, that keep the values rising at a fast clip. However, in Baltimore, one other interesting aspect is it's not just about going to and exceeding the pre-recession highs, Keith. It also has to do with healthy rents. When you have a situation where you have healthy rents, but underpricing on the properties themselves, it delivers very healthy cap rates, as we saw on the last real example of a 9.4% cap rate or return on that all-cash purchase. What else you have in Baltimore, it's just 45 minutes up the road from Washington, D.C.
Right.
where prices are incredible and crazy. And mid-level bureaucrats, for example, amongst many, many others, find Baltimore a great place to live. Now, Baltimore also has a higher than national average renters to owners. Nationally, Keith, there are 35% renters to owners in most major markets. Baltimore, it's 50% or more. So you've got a lot of renters. You've got a healthy feeder market in that they can't afford oftentimes to live in Washington, D.C., a short 45-minute ride down the road. And you've also got low home prices. You put that all together, and it equals a great BRRRR market.
Yeah, 100%. So that's the why for Baltimore. It's those economics in Baltimore of low unemployment, low cost property. Median incomes are 30% above the national average per the Census Bureau. And yeah, it's really that proximity to higher priced Washington, D.C., and the fact that more than half of Baltimore rents that makes this a good area in particular pockets. So, Phil, just in wrapping up, any last thoughts on the BRRRR strategy and how that really helps the investor achieve an increased ROI and velocity of money?
Well, absolutely, Keith, and thank you for that. Number one, first and foremost, that contrast between low home prices, healthy rents, delivers high cap rates, high immediate return, even before you do your refinance. Once you bring that refinanced component into the picture, that's where your velocity of money really comes into play, because you're able oftentimes to pull out such a significant amount of the cash that you initially put in. That's what boosts your return, generally 18%, 20%, 25%. There are even some cases we have seen in which you have gotten 100% of your money out that you put in. We call that infinite returns.
That's an infinite return.
The only amount of money really that you've got in that particular deal are your closing costs and finance fees, which are negligible in the big picture, Keith.
And Phil, now you offer opportunities in Baltimore with a reputable contractor that has a track record and has that 120-day renovation period guaranteed, which is what you mentioned before, with warranted work. And the 120-day renovation guarantee basically means that on that 121st day, you, the investor, automatically begin collecting rent, even if it weren't tenanted for some reason. So, Phil, tell us more about the report that you've made available for someone that might be interested in this.
What we put together, Keith, and it's available from your website, is a report that answers the question, why Baltimore? It speaks about some of the economic dynamics, the fundamentals of Baltimore, and also will address, I think, a lot of the specific protective points that are important to the investor. You just touched on some of them. We only use a licensed general contractor, one of the largest in Baltimore, the CEO of which happens to personally own 200 units. So that's definitely putting your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
That also for us, and thereby for the investor, ensures that every project comes in on time, on budget. Not that a BRRRR buyer is ever going to be asked for extra money. Never will happen. But it is important for our health and thereby the ability to continue offering great opportunities to investors that those projects do come in on time, on budget. As such, there's also a very important component here, and that's the property management. This is a division of the large general contractor. We negotiated a very special 7% rate. Plus, of course, there's a small 3% premium on outside vendor expense, if you will. In other words, if somebody brings in a repair costing $100, you'll be charged $103. The bottom line is that the property management component, which every investor knows is so very, very important, is top flight, reliable, and very, very affordable in this case. We stay involved simply because, Keith, the bottom line is we have no interest in selling just one property. We want to develop a relationship, and I think you alluded to the importance of relationships here, and that's what we're all about.
For some investors, BRRRR is their favorite strategy, and they think it's the quickest way to build real estate wealth because little or sometimes even none of your own money ends up in the deal. But you do need to be able to come in with more cash than you do with Turnkey, and there are more moving parts. But the higher cash-on-cash return that you effectively get with the BRRRR strategy nearly can't be beat elsewhere. If you want to get a hold of that report to learn more about Baltimore and why it's advantageous for the BRRRR strategy and how you can get into a relationship and do this, that starts at getricheducation.com/Baltimore. That's where Phil's prepared a report where you can learn more. That's getricheducation.com/Baltimore. Phil, thanks so much for coming onto the show.
Keith, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, the BRRRR strategy is definitely something that's grown in popularity. In fact, I don't even know that term or the acronym exists until 5 or 10 years ago, even though savvy investors have been doing it longer than this. Now, you might remember when we had the inventor of the Deal Check app, Anton Ivanov, on the show here last year. Well, that app just added BRRRR deal analysis. Your cash-on-cash return is your annual cash flow divided by your equity or your dollars invested. So then few invested dollars, hence a small denominator, gives you a high return. Who is BRRRR for? Well, if you have a wad of cash now and you're looking to be more aggressive in order to optimize your cash-on-cash return, then this could be for you. You could do all this yourself, just like you could do a lot of things yourself. But this opportunity allows you to enlist a licensed rehab crew, sort of a turnkey crew, if you will, and then after rehab and tenanting, the option to transition the property to an experienced manager, should you so choose. For all this in Baltimore BRRRRs, learn more at getricheducation.com/Baltimore, where Phil and I have placed a report for you. He and his company also offer Philadelphia Turnkey property, if you're more of a fan of the Turnkey model. To learn more about that, also begin at that same place, getricheducation.com/Baltimore. Until next week, when I'll be back to help you build your wealth, I'm Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, getricheducation.com.